Today's video is sponsored by Craftsy. These are your typical pine side tables. You can find them on Marketplace, in thrift stores, sometimes even on the side of the road if you're lucky. There's nothing special about them. They aren't unique, they aren't overly valuable, but to me, these are the perfect pieces to learn on. So this video is going to be geared toward people just starting out. Now you can see there are some heat or watermarks on here, but they're white, and what this means is that they haven't penetrated the finish. So removing the finish, in essence, will remove these stains. Unlike the dark rings that you see on furniture all the time that have penetrated the finish and gotten into the wood. Those are a little bit harder to remove. So the legs on these pieces are just bolted on with wing nuts, and you can see these clips here. These are to hold the top on. This is going to allow that top panel, which is solid wood, to expand with the seasons. So many times you see the tops of solid wood furniture screwed on, and unless the screw holes are done a certain way, it can cause splitting down the road. So whoever built these actually did it right. These were built in 1993, and they look it, so I'm going to try to modernize these a little bit. Stay tuned. My name is Angie, and I refinish furniture. Sometimes I paint and sometimes I don't, but I always do what I can to save old pieces from the trash. Welcome to my workroom. When I say that this video is going to be geared towards beginners, that doesn't mean that there aren't certain tools that you're going to need to complete this job, but I'm going to try to keep it as basic as possible. This looks like somebody's dog or kitty was rubbing underneath and got some fur caught there. But yeah, you're going to see me use a power sander here. You don't need to have a power sander to do this, but I'm telling you right now it's going to go a lot faster. You could use a stripper to remove the old finish, or a scraper. You'll see me use a scraper a little bit here just to kind of show you. But the finishes they use on these pine pieces were so thick that honestly, as long as it's solid pine you're dealing with, sanding it off is honestly the fastest way to do it. If you're dealing with veneer though, even on some parts, you might want to combine some scraping or stripping rather than just sanding a finish off. And honestly, solid wood pieces are pretty much the only time I will sand a finish off, unless it's already failing and brittle. I'm going to be removing this from the top so that I can sand both areas properly and a lot faster, especially these parts, because if it was pressed up against here, it's a little bit tricky to get all the finish off easily with a sander. But I do need to remember exactly which orientation this was in, so you're going to see me mark the underside of the top here in a minute. Right now you can tell from the patina pattern on the underside where the drawer was, but once this is all sanded off, it's all going to be a uniform color and you won't be able to tell anymore. You could go by the holes where the clips were, but just to be on the safe side, I'm going to take this little center punch and just put a couple little marks there, just so that I know. So looking at the underside here, you can see the pine where it has not been exposed to any light. This ring around the outside here is where it has naturally aged, but there's no finish on it. And then around the edge is where you see a little bit of the finish. Basically, they finished over the top and the lip right up to where that skirting was, but they didn't bother to finish the rest of it. I'm actually going to be sealing all of it, so I'm going to sand this all down. This is the underside, so I started with a 120 grit. On the top, it's definitely going to be thicker, so I will likely start with an 80. When I first started flipping furniture, I almost always started at 80, but I very rarely go below 120 now. But because there's hardly any finish here on the bottom, I'm starting with 120. So for anyone just starting out that's having some issues with sanding and getting it even, and you're not sure exactly how much to sand, especially on veneer, this is a little trick that I picked up a while ago. And basically you just take a pencil and lightly go across the entire surface. You're not pressing down in, especially on pine, because you don't want to dent the wood. But what this allows you to do is see exactly where you've taken off enough, or not enough, as the case may be. Another tip I have is something that I mentioned several times in my videos, and that is because you have to move up in grit. So you start with your lowest grit and you eventually move up until you get to your highest grit or your finish grit. If you have dings and scratches, don't try to get them all out with your lowest grit. The lowest grit should just be for smoothing it out, getting off any remaining finish, and then with your subsequent grits, you can little by little start to pick away at some of those more shallow dings and marks. So I mentioned in the beginning that you don't necessarily need a power sander to do something like this, but as you can see here, this scraper is barely cutting into this super thick varnish or whatever kind of finish they put on this. You can scrape it. I'm really good at scraping and I'm having trouble getting through this. So you can see here the difference that a sander makes. Does it need to be, you know, a $600 or $700 or $800 sander? No, it doesn't. I did just fine for a couple of years with my little $100 DeWalt 5-inch orbital sander. Not all sanders are created equally, however. There's different shapes and different movements and purposes. Even within the orbital sander realm, there are different stroke lengths, and that is going to give you different results. Some stroke lengths are good for removing a lot of material at once. Some are better for finishing. So, you know, when you're starting out and you say to yourself, I want to go get a sander, just do a little bit of research because, yeah, they're not all created equally. One of those little triangular mouse sanders would be a real pain on this piece trying to get this old finish off. Whereas a 5-inch orbital, like my old DeWalt one, would have been perfect. The reason I'm going so closely up the grits is because pine is so soft and I want to make sure that I get this as smooth as possible. As I get up to the 180, I switch to hand sanding around the edges rather than the power sander. This is just going to smooth everything out. And if you've never touched finely sanded pine before, I can't even describe how buttery smooth it is. It feels so nice, but it's very dusty. So next step is removing all of the dust. About a month ago, I released a video about taking a big MDF credenza and turning it into this beautiful apothecary looking thing. And in that video, I had a little blurb about wanting to make some bunny furniture. So this is an IKEA bed. It's technically a doll bed, but the bunnies love it and it's pine, untreated pine, so it's bunny safe. I want to make something like this, but obviously nicer. Now, bunnies chew, they're going to chew. There's nothing you can do about it. So you have to be really careful about what woods you're picking for something like this because there are woods that are toxic to rabbits. The wood thing I have sorted out, but what I'm kind of struggling with is the bedding. So this is just the cute little blanket and pillow that comes with it. Even earlier, you guys saw me redo this dresser into a kitty condo where I had to use a sewing machine for the first time since 7th grade. Decades ago, and you guys watched me struggle through making this pillow thing for the cushions inside the cat condo. Now, they turned out okay. I mean, not my best work for sure, but the point is I need to get a little bit better with my sewing. It's something that comes in handy with furniture, whether it's for upholstery or just adding a cushion here and there. But yeah, so I need to make some sort of a quilt, but with rabbits, like I said, they're going to chew. So I have this 100% cotton batting here, and this is the fabric that I picked out. Now, this is the cutest thing I've ever seen. This is the one I want to use for the bunny beds, but I'm also going to make a cat bed or two, and I picked out this really cute fabric to make the cushions for that. Like I said in the beginning, this video is sponsored by Craftsy. Thank you so much to them for not only sponsoring this video, but also giving me some really high quality videos to watch that are going to help me with this project. This little white basket is all of the sewing stuff that I own. I'm very new at this. I didn't know that there were different plies of thread and different types. I just picked what colors I liked. So after watching a couple videos by Kelly Ashton, I think I have a pretty good idea of what I want to do. Now, I'm not doing a typical quilt that is patchwork. It'll be more kind of like the IKEA version where it's sort of like a faux quilt. But watching a few videos on how to choose your thread and quilting basics really gave me a good understanding of what I need to do. But Craftsy isn't just about sewing. They have some amazing videos about cooking and baking, different types of art, embroidery, knitting, quilting, and even plant care. Craftsy is always coming up with new videos to keep you inspired, and there's even the opportunity to connect with other makers and share ideas and inspire each other. I'm looking forward to bringing you guys a video where I put all of this together, creating one-of-a-kind bunny beds, and hopefully my faux quilts turned out okay. The first 1,000 of you to click the link in the description box below will get a full year of premium membership to Craftsy for only $1.49. That is a great deal, my friends. Okay, Houston, we have a problem here on one of the tops. You can see that there's a knot here that is split. And this was hidden by that super thick finish, but now that that finish is gone, it is exposed. So we have to fill this. I could use a wood filler, but I also want to stabilize this so it doesn't move any further. So what I'm opting to do here, and I have my camera set up here so you can see it from another angle as well. I'm going to fill this with some CA glue. Now you can get this stuff tinted in different colors. I'm opting to use clear because I'm not sure yet exactly what I want to do with these tops. I'm using the medium glue, which is going to be a bit runnier than the thick glue. This is important because I need it to slide underneath this crack. I put some in, use a little accelerator to harden it instantly, add a bit more, and eventually get to the point here where it is fully hardened and completely smooth to the touch. So it's finally time now to start working on these. I'm going to do this exactly the same way, except I'm not starting with 80 grit. Even though these are finished, the sides and legs of pieces are seldom as thickly finished as the tops of things. So for this, I went just with the 120 grit, and it went 120, 150, and I stopped at 180, doing the same pencil trick the whole way along, making sure that everything is even and smooth. So this is exciting. I think I just got my inspiration for the parts of this that are going to be wood. Fusion Mineral Paint made an announcement a few days ago about some new stain and finishing oils that they were coming out with, and they actually sent me a couple to try out. I do know that I want to paint the legs or part of the legs, but the whole skirting around the tops of the legs and the tops are going to be wood grain. Okay, so I have to deal with this drawer. I have no idea what this stain is, but taking the bottom out would be really difficult. You can see it's glued all the way around the outside, and the sides are stapled. This bottom is also masonite, it's not wood, so I'm just gonna have to clean this up and see where we end up. I always like cleaning up drawers. It's one of those things that just sets your pieces apart from others on Marketplace that don't take the time to do it. If there's a thick finish and there's nothing wrong with it, that's one thing, but this had a fairly thin finish on the drawers and they were pretty dinged up and just looked a little dull. So, I mean, aside from the stain here. So I went at this with a scraper, a card scraper, sandpaper, and it was coming off, but it was quite difficult. So pine pieces like this are awesome for people just starting out and learning how to use their tools and figuring out the styles they like. But here's the thing about pine. They're often really dinged up. You're going to have knot holes with voids and areas where the lathe has dug in and it's not quite smooth. There's going to be no way to get every dent out of this entire table. It's just not going to happen. So it's something to keep in mind. When you're refinishing it as wood, it's not quite as noticeable, but when you do paint it, sometimes those dings really stand out. So you kind of have to ask yourself if you're comfortable with that. It's just the nature of pine. It's a very soft wood. And even if you did somehow manage to fill them all, the slightest bump with the vacuum, this is going to ding again, and it's going to ding a lot over the years. I am, however, going to try to fill some of the voids. So as you can see here, I'm going to be staining the top part and painting the lower section of the leg. So for the lower part that I'm going to be painting, I'm just giving it a light scuff sand to smooth it all out, and then we're going to be applying a primer. And before I do apply the primer, which I'm going to be spraying, I'm going to tape off this lower section that will be stained later on. If you've been watching my channel for a while, you know that I use fusion mineral paint, which doesn't always require a primer depending on what wood it's going on and what color. Pine needs to be primed if you're going to be painting it, particularly a lighter color. Now these are two examples of primers that you can get at the store. They're both made by Zinsser. One is odorless, which is really nice, and the other one is the Bin Shellac based primer. This odorless one is great for certain stains, or if you're painting on a slick surface like laminate. When you're trying to seal in bleed through, which pine is very prone to, you want something like this with a shellac base. It even says right on the can here that it blocks knots and sap. It is considerably more expensive than the other version though, but this is not a spot to cheap out, because if you do use the other one, especially on pine, you're going to be surprised in 6 months to a year when those knots start showing through your paint. With pine, I usually like to do 2 layers of primer. So once this first coat was completely dry, I went in with a fine grit sand pad and just smoothed it out, and then applied my second coat. Now on to the stain and finishing oil. This is one of their new colors in this product. I was super happy. I didn't know what colors they were going to send me, but I'm really glad this was one of them, because I think anyway that this might replace the need to do a paint wash, especially on pine when I want that sort of tan washed look. At least that's what I'm thinking that this is going to look like. So I'm a little bit messy when I apply this. It's so funny. Sometimes I watch instructional videos and people, they're just like casually pulling the brush along. I like to get that stuff on and then get it off. So I kind of apply it as quickly as possible in whatever direction needs to happen, and then brush it smooth. And you'll see me do that here. This stuff is supposed to sit on for, I think, around 15 minutes, somewhere in there, depending on if you're using it on raw wood or over paint, which you can do. But if it's over paint, you need to remove it right away. It is super hot and humid in this garage while I'm filming this, so my dry times are probably a little bit different than typical. So basically what I did is I went and applied it to all 4 sides of this, and then by the time I got finished with the last one, I went and removed it from the first one, and so on. What's nice about the stain and finishing oil is that it's a top coat and stain in one. So, you can add extra protection if you want. They also make a natural stain and finishing oil, which will also give it a little bit more of a glossy finish. I did find this was kind of matte, which is actually perfect for what I was aiming for here with this look. But if you want something that's more glossy, then yes, you can definitely add extra coats or add some other oil-based clear top coat over top. Stepping backwards just a moment here, I mentioned that the setup time for this is about 15 minutes. So you apply it, you wait 15 minutes, and you wipe it off. But that, along with cure time, really depends on so many variables. I'm a member of quite a few furniture flipping groups on Facebook, and there's always questions about certain products and people saying, I used this product and it just didn't turn out for me. What did I do wrong? And it's not always that you did something wrong, but your environment is a huge part of it. Things like humidity and temperature will drastically affect your open times and cure times of products. So now I need to find a color that is going to work well with this natural tone of the pine. For some reason, I was drawn to the greens. I held up a few different ones and ended up with these 2 as my favorite. Wellington is a darker green, and Eucalyptus is a beautiful soft green. I'm going for kind of a cottagey, or more specifically beach cottagey look for this. So I think I'm going to go with a lighter green, and hopefully it turns out. So another issue that a lot of beginners have is dealing with paint streaks, and often it's caused from too much paint. You can see I barely have any paint on my brush, especially for this first coat. You want enough paint on the brush that it glides smoothly, but you don't want too much or it's just too thick and you're going to have really noticeable brush marks. People often ask me how I get such a nice finish without spraying, and it's just using the right amount of paint. So on these legs, we've got 2 full coats of shellac-based primer and 2 coats of paint. Once the paint was dry enough to handle, I took the tape off and gave the bottoms of these, or technically the tops of these legs, light sanding just to smooth it out and make sure there was no excess residue from the tape on there. And then I went ahead and used the stain and finishing oil in the same way I did on the rest of the piece. Looking here, on the right we've got the stain and finishing oil, and on the left is the natural pine. So you're probably thinking, why not just put a clear coat on the pine? Well, pine is gonna turn yellow. So if you like yellow, that's fine. I'm not a fan of it. I like the more neutral look. And I just showed you with a bit of water there, but any clear top coat is gonna turn that pine, that color yellow. And there's a good shot of it. We've got natural pine, clear coated pine, and then this is the pine with that stain and finishing oil, which I think is a beautiful and super easy alternative to a paint wash. So I am going to be putting round knobs on the drawers just like there were before, but not the same kind. I'm using these beautiful brushed brass wool just to give it a little bit of a modern flair and a slightly less country look. And now we have to address these drawers. I got the stain out as much as possible, but it's not perfect, and I did have to scuff a little bit of that masonite drawer bottom. So I'm going to be adding a liner. Now this is just a repositionable shelf liner, or you can even use repositionable wallpaper for this. Just cut it to size and apply it, smoothing it out a little bit as you go. I don't like to take all of the backing paper off. I'd say maybe about half of it until I make sure that everything's going to line up properly, and then I pull the rest off. I'm going to be applying a little bit of Howard Feed-In wax to the rest of the drawer, being careful obviously not to get it on the paper. I didn't want to apply it before putting the paper in, just to make sure there was no adhesion issues. So the thing that comes up every now and then is a question about why I will do a really difficult piece and then a really easy piece on my channel. And the reason for that is when I started my channel, the goal was just to document what I do on a daily basis. It's not to try to outdo my last video every single time and continually one-up myself, because that's just not sustainable and it's not what I do. So everybody loves a big dramatic reveal, but I'm also here for the people just learning and starting out. So just wanted to address that. So for this makeover, I used my SurfPrep sander, I used the bin shellac-based primer, I used some Starbond CA Glue and Titebond Accelerant to fill in some gaps and holes. I used the Fusion Stain and Finishing Oil in their new color Light Oak, and this Precision Defined paintbrush, which comes in a set on Amazon. Great brushes, pretty cheap. Fusion Mineral Paint Eucalyptus, and this nice little angle brush here. And the Howard Feed-In wax, which is the beeswax orange oil mix, and a wax brush to apply it. So looking back now at what I started with, these are just a very basic, simple pine side table set. And I wanted to refresh these, give it a nice beachy vibe, and hopefully I've done that. And hopefully this video has given you some tips and tricks with refinishing pine, and also a little bit of information about Fusion's new product. Thank you so much for watching, enjoy the reveal, and I will see you next time.